We're about to take a deep dive into Pakistan's future, or what's supposed to be its future, the 2026 federal budget. But as you're about to see, that future is completely and utterly trapped by its past. So what are we talking about here? We are talking about this number, 17.57 trillion rupees. I mean, it's a number so massive, it's almost hard to wrap your head around, right? But that's the total amount the government plans to spend in just 1 year. So that leads to the really big question. When you've got 17.5 trillion rupees, where does it all actually go? Let's open up the country's checkbook and find out. To start, let's actually look at some of the good news, because on the surface, the economy is showing some real signs of life. In the first quarter of the fiscal year, Pakistan's GDP grew by nearly 4%. That's more than double the rate of the year before. The industrial sector jumped almost 10%. So on paper, things are definitely moving. But you knew there was a but coming, didn't you? Here's the catch. And it's the one fundamental problem that undercuts everything else. The government expects to collect around 14 trillion rupees in taxes, but it plans to spend over 17.5 trillion. That gap, well, that's where the trouble really begins. You see, that budget shortfall leads us directly to the single biggest expense in the entire budget. And this one expense, it tells the real story of Pakistan's economy. Just look at this. Of that entire 17.57 trillion rupee budget, a colossal 8.2 trillion is set aside for just one thing: interest payments on old debt. That is 47%, nearly half of all government spending. And let's be crystal clear about what debt servicing actually means. This is not money being used to pay down the original loans. Nope. This is just the interest. It's the markup that has to be paid on money that was borrowed years or even decades ago. So to keep up with these massive interest payments, the country has to borrow even more money. And the result? 7.86 billion rupees in new debt gets added every single day. Okay, so think about it. With almost half the budget gone before it can even be spent on the country, the money that's left over is caught in a brutal competition. It basically becomes a zero-sum game between guns and growth. And this chart really just illustrates the country's priorities dictated by its debt. Look at these numbers. 8.2 trillion for debt, then 2.55 trillion for defense, and way, way, way down at the bottom, just 1 trillion for development. Let me just state that as plainly as I can. The government is allocating 2.5 times more money to the military than it is to the entire fund for building the country's essential infrastructure, things like roads, schools, and hospitals. So here's the most crucial point. The money spent just servicing old debt is more than the defense and development budgets combined. Think about that. All the money for the military plus all the money for building the country for the future is still less than the bill for past borrowing. And to make matters even worse, that tiny 1 trillion rupee development budget, it isn't even being spent effectively. 7 months into the fiscal year, only 27% of those funds had actually been used. So when you put all of these pieces together, the massive spending, the overwhelming debt, and these totally skewed priorities, the final picture becomes alarmingly clear. This really says it all. The country is stuck in an economic trap. This isn't about a lack of potential or work ethic. It's a structural problem where the financial obligations of the past are literally consuming any chance of building a prosperous future. So let's just recap the math real quick. 47% for past debt, 15% for defense. That leaves very, very little for everything else: education, healthcare, and all the infrastructure you need for actual growth. And that brings us to the final unshakable verdict. Based on its own budget, Pakistan is not a growth economy, it's not a development economy, it is, plain and simple, a debt servicing economy, where the primary function of the state's finances is to pay the interest on yesterday's loans, leaving almost nothing for tomorrow.